forms an exception to direct evidence, and what are the reasons for its relevancy and admissibility. So to repeat again, to reiterate again, and today I'll be focusing on the English law and how Stephen was cognizant of the deficiencies in English law and deliberately formulated these three provisions as part of the scheme of relevancy in Indian Evidence Act, which can be and which must be said to be original in that respect. Otherwise, there is nothing original in the Indian Evidence Act. So what you call original in Indian Evidence Act is only a departure that Stephen has made from the principles of English law of evidence, and for good reasons. Now, why they couldn't make those departures is something that is all too obvious. And anyone who has some idea about the English justice system, both criminal justice and civil justice, would know that how not only the society but also the system has been very orthodox, very traditional, and very slow as to change is concerned. So to reiterate, to repeat, res gesti is translated as or means part of the matter, part of the transaction. And I had told you that in English jurisprudence, this often is understood as an umbrella term. Umbrella, all encompassing. I had even, you may remember, I had even quoted Justice Blackstone, where he had commented, while a young lawyer was struggling to introduce some irrelevant evidence, that why don't you try your hand at res gesti? So umbrella term referring in general to statements which are so bound up, which are so tied with a particular transaction as to form an important part of that transaction. Recall what I had told you when I introduced you to the term res gesti, that in India we call it facts which are part of the same transaction. So in other words, the evidence must have some obvious relevance in relation to other evidence, that it needs to be admitted in order to complete the picture. I'll give you live examples. I'll give you some practical examples of how does it work. But before that, I need to also explain that whose testimony, whose evidence we are talking about. Whose evidence would be, whose testimony would be in the form of res gesti and would be admissible, would be relevant. So section 6, section 7, section 8 cannot be understood, cannot be discussed in isolation to each other. At least these three form what we call the relating to admissibility of fact forming part of the same transaction, or what we inappropriately call the rule relating to res gesti. So what all is included? The first is that spontaneous exclamations, spontaneous exclamations. And this is the most important type of a statement. Most of the cases that you would be reading, be it English decisions or Indian decisions as well, would be on this aspect. This is the most important type of a statement, admissible as part of the res gesti. And whose statement then? Either of the victim or of a witness. Either of the victim or of a witness. If victim survives the crime, very well. If victim did not survive the crime, of course, spontaneous exclamations of the witnesses. So the person involved, whether a victim or a witness, saying something instinctively, by instinct, which is seen as intrinsic to the event in question, is part of what we call res gesti and is therefore admissible. So what are the requirements? The first and foremost requirement is that it must be contemporaneous with the event. And there should be absence of any opportunity to reflect or concoct a story. Spontaneous, contemporary, and lacking any opportunity to reflect, to make up, or to concoct a story. If the person has had time to think about what he has seen or about what has happened, there is a risk that the statement has lost its spontaneity. And it is no longer unpremeditated. It should be unpremeditated. And these are the requirements. Whether the fact is sought to be admitted in English courts or whether the facts are sought to be admitted in Indian courts, it's another matter that the English court in R versus Bedingfield, which is an 1879 decision, took these requirements to illogical extremes. Illogical extremes. Remember, recall the facts. Simple, very simple facts. What were the facts? In R versus Bedingfield, that 1879 decision, the accused was charged with murder. Evidence of the deceased's statement. After she emerged from a room in which she had been with the accused, and while pointing out to her throat, which had been slit, which had been cut, she addressed her aunt, and that statement has become a classic example of this discussion and debate whether it would form part of the same transaction or not. Look at the statement that she made. And I reproduce that statement verbatim from the judgment. Oh dear aunt, see what Harry has done to me. And soon afterwards, she died. When her aunt was produced as a witness and sought to prove that this is what her niece had told, the English court rejected and held the statement to be inadmissible on the ground that the exclamation came too late. Too late, after the deed had been done and not while it was being done. Please understand. After the deed had been done. The statement was made after the deed had been done and not while it was being done. So had the deceased made this statement while Harry was slitting her throat inside of the room, certainly the decision in R versus Bedingfield would have been different and the court would have admitted that statement as part of the same transaction. But it's sometimes said that the statement was still relevant and admissible as part of res gesti because there was no opportunity on the part of the woman, the deceased, to reflect, concoct and make something which was premeditated. But in spite of its harshness, how harsh this proposition was to the prosecution, making their job even more difficult. R versus Bedingfield held its ground for several years, decades, before it was finally overruled. Overruled. Bedingfield has been overruled specifically. To that extent, Nishant should stand corrected by both Privy Council and House of Lords. Certainly a Privy Council has no right and jurisdiction to overrule decision of an English court. That's a technical issue. But House of Lords has. Rattan versus R, that decision which Nishant had discussed with you, is a Privy Council decision. Disagreed with the view taken. It's a 1972 decision. You can understand that how for almost 100 years R versus Bedingfield was the law. Too technical. And final blow came in the House of Lords decision in R versus Andrews in 1987. So it would be interesting to see that what the House of Lords had to say. In R versus Andrews, you already know the decision in Rattan versus R, that 1972 decision of Privy Council. In R versus Andrews, the accused was charged with murder again. The victim was stabbed and robbed, and within a few minutes of the stabbing, he was found by neighbors on the staircase below his flat. The police arrived and the victim told them the names of his attackers. He was taken to a hospital where he was put on life support, and he died only 2 months after this attack. So the House of Lords said that the victim's statement naming his attackers tendered for the purpose of establishing the truth of what it contained, that he had been attacked by the two men named, and therefore hearsay, was nevertheless admissible as part of the res gesti. And the House of Lords also, you read the beautiful passage that has been written by Lord Ackner, A-C-K-N-E-R, in that judgment. Lord Ackner summarized the position relating to the doctrine of res gesti as it is understood. That what are those 5 aspects that the trial judge should consider? And I believe that what you find in your section 6, 7, 8 and what is now known as res gesti in England are on the same pedestal after this decision in R versus Andrews. So the primary question which the judge must ask himself is, can the possibility of concoction or distortion be disregarded? And this is exactly what the court has to look into this as well. To answer that question, can the possibility of concoction or distortion be disregarded? To answer that question, the judge must first consider the circumstances in which the particular statement was made. And this is exactly how the judges in India also approach the question of admissibility and relevancy of a statement which it is claimed by the prosecution formed part of the same transaction. It was also said that in order for the statement to be sufficiently spontaneous, it must be so closely associated with the event, which has excited the statement, that it can be fairly stated that the mind of the declarant was still dominated by the event. The mind was still dominated by the event. The statement which has been made is made because your mind was still dominated by the event. It's something that the court has to look into. The time factor. The time factor is very crucial, very critical. So did the court lay down any yardstick, any hard and fast rule, formula 2 minutes gap between event and statement would be too much, or 2 hours would be too much. No, that is not possible. That's not possible. And then the court also said in that decision, in R versus Andrews, that quite apart from the time factor, there may be special features in the case which relate to the possibility of concoction or distortion. There may be. And also, what you need to understand is that, consider the case of R versus Bedingfield. Who is before the court? Not the deceased. Had the deceased been there in the witness box, of course, we would not have been discussing all this. He would have said that Harry had attacked her. The prosecution would have found other evidences to support its case. And all. But in most cases where this statement would be sought to be admitted and relied on, you would find that the maker of the statement is not available. The maker is not available. Someone else who heard the statement, or someone else to whom that statement was made, is the one who is before the court. In most cases. So there may be a possibility of error in the facts stated or narrated in the statement. So to the question that the witness is reproducing the statement that was made by someone else, or may have misunderstood, misinterpreted, possibility of error in the facts narrated in the statement, the court said that if only the ordinary fallibility of human recollection is relied on, this goes to the weight to be attached to the statement, not to its admissibility. It would still be admissible. Whether the court is going to attach greater weight or it would carry greater probative value or not is something that would depend upon the facts and circumstances. As far as admissibility is concerned, the court said that it's still admissible. It's still admissible. And then in deciding this, Andrews, the House of Lords had accepted the analysis of res gesti as done by the Privy Council in Ratton versus R. You remember what the facts of Ratton versus R are. The evidence of the wife's desperate telephone call was held to be original evidence of fact, relevant to her state of mind. That was held to be part of the res gesti. Res gesti. And then Ratton has been applied in several subsequent cases, several, by the English courts, and is still held to be a good law. And is a good law, no doubt about it. You can read, say, for example, a 1998 decision reported as R versus Newport. R versus Newport. Here also, a desperate phone call was made by the victim to her friend. And the friend, when he testified, he said that at the time when she spoke and made that phone call, she sounded agitated and frightened and was asking if she could come to the friend's house, if she had to flee in a hurry. 20 minutes later, she was stabbed to death by her husband, who pursued her down the road after she left the house following an argument with him. So it was something which formed part of the same transaction and therefore held admissible. Applying R versus Ratten doesn't mean that everything would be brought within res gesti and would be admissible. Applying Ratten would mean that the courts have a reasonable view of what constitutes res gesti and what doesn't. And this is exactly what is being done by the courts in India. Let me refer to an Indian decision and then I'll be talking about one incident, one instance which we as a student of law should be viewed from that perspective. It's a case, Krishna Kumar Malik versus State of Haryana. Yeah. Okay. That is something I think I already had discussed all this under the head, if you remember, spontaneous exclamation. I used that. You remember, you recall? Spontaneous exclamation. A spontaneous exclamation is not a mere narration of past events. Please understand. It's not. It's spontaneous, it's exclamation. And another thing that you need to understand, and this is something I guess I must explain at this juncture itself. It's not necessary that you make a statement which is understood. What statement you made, what was heard, should be narrated by the witness in the witness box and let the court decide that whether the statement had any relevance to the fact in issue or not. I already said that in R versus Bedingfield, had the girl the deceased cried inside the room while her throat was being slit. And cries were heard by the aunt. Cries are not a statement as such. Someone who is weeping, someone who is writhing in pain is not necessarily making any statement in the sense we ordinarily understand a statement. That look, aunt, what he is doing. The statement was that look, aunt, what he has done. I had told you that had she said at the time when her throat was being slit, that look, aunt, what he is doing to me. An aunt rushing, even if she failed to see that Harry was in fact slitting throat of her niece, that would have been an entirely different issue altogether. And as I said that being a spontaneous statement, that would have been held to be part of res gesti and admissible. But it's not necessary that every time some statement is made or some fact is narrated, it could be cries. I remember Nishant, let me give you example from what Nishant had said. Father is killing, is in the process of hitting, killing mother of 2 children, young children. What would be their reaction, a spontaneous reaction? Are they supposed to cry for help? बचाओ बचाओ, पापा मम्मी को मार रहे हैं, kind of? No. Unless and until they have attained some sufficient maturity. A 10, 12, 13, 14-year-old boy seeing his father hitting his mother would be making such kind of a statement. अंकल आइए, अंकल बचाइए, मम्मा को मार रहे हैं. Small young children, they would be crying. Their cries are heard by someone who comes and sees the father absconding, running away, and the mother lying in a pool of blood. This man who came after hearing the shrieks and cries of the children would be allowed to testify what he heard while the transaction was still going on. Because those cries are part of the same transaction, are res gesti. Cries, shrieks, sound that one makes while one is writhing in pain. You don't always make a statement. So in that sense you need to understand. But mere narration of past event certainly would not be part of the same transaction for the reasons that I already explained when I was quoting from the judgment in R versus Andrews, where I told you that now the law on res gesti in England should be treated as on par with the law on res gesti in India. But then you need to read those illustrations in section 8 as well. Quite a few illustrations. I am deliberately avoiding reading that for you. It's not possible. It's a virtual class. It has its own limitations. You remember that while I was taking your other classes, I would be asking people to read it for the entire class. Only in today's newspaper there is this unfortunate incident reported. It happened 2 days back, that a young girl who had gone to meet her friend in Jhansi outside of a government polytechnic was dragged inside and was raped. All the accused persons have been arrested. This is what is reported in media. I don't know if you read it or not. So how did it all happen? And suppose there is a trial of those who are involved in that. What all the prosecution would be relying on and would be seeking to proffer in evidence as relevant fact. The fact as reported in the media is that while, and please listen to this very carefully, that while the girl was being dragged inside by 7, 8, 9 young, 19 to 24 is the age range in which they are, 7, 8 people. She pleaded, bhaiya bhaiya mat kariye, chhod dijiye, kind of a statement. But they didn't relent, they had no mercy, they took her inside, molested her, and one of them had even sexual intercourse with the girl, poor girl. The entire incident was filmed. They even threatened the couple that they'll be making this video public, and they extorted 2,000 rupees. That was all that the girl had with her. So while this entire incident was going on inside of the campus, the girl was still crying. She was not in a position to make any statement in the sense ki bhaiya bhaiya chhod dijiye. Some sound, some unusual sound emanating from inside the campus was heard by a police constable who was by chance passing by, and he got suspicious, entered the premises. Seeing him, the accused fled. So while he'll be deposing in the court during trial, his statement that I heard the girl crying, I heard unusual sound, would all be part of res gesti and would be relevant and admissible. Relevant and admissible. And not only this, please read illustration J to section 8. J to section 8. It's almost the same illustration. Striking similarity with the fact that I just narrated before you. A girl who has been ravished is the word that has been used, archaic, obsolete, whatever, ravish. Makes a complaint that she has been ravished by such and such person, named, unnamed, whatever. Immediately after ravishment, that complaint is not a mere narration of past facts. Please understand, that's still spontaneous. It may not be in the form of exclamation के form में नहीं है. But section 8 declares that to be a relevant fact and part of the same transaction, and therefore admissible. But it's also given there that if she, without making a complaint, merely narrates this incident, read that. merely narrates. She is not making any complaint. She is merely narrating that. अरे क्या बताएं, मेरे साथ तो बहुत बुरा हो गया, मेरे साथ ऐसा कर दिया। वो भी कब? शाम को, after sufficient lag of time and all. The law says that no, that is not part of the same transaction and it's not admissible. But as far as our law is concerned, because it's technically different from English law, there is a reference to its admissibility under section 32 as dying declaration or as a corroborative evidence under section 157 of Indian Evidence Act. So in that sense I was telling you, and in that sense Nishant had spoken about why it should not be in form of a mere narration of past events. Mere narration of past event, that something which has already happened is not part of the same transaction. But what event would be considered to be a past event, so as to exclude that statement being part of the same transaction, is something that the court would decide upon the peculiar facts and circumstances of the case. Remember the facts in R versus Andrews. Please remember that. No one had seen the deceased being attacked. No one had seen. He was only found by the neighbors in the staircase. Attached to his flat and all. So I don't think that what he said was a mere narration of, he was still writhing in pain, in shock, and the statement was still influenced by the event that had happened. And this is exactly what I already, I think, explained all this. So you have to connect the dots and to come to a conclusion that whether this statement, exclamation, sound that has been made, cries, shrieks, would be part of the same transaction or not. It has to be instinctive reaction. Utterances were, for example, instinctive reaction. No one smiles while being slapped. Everyone would be crying, writhing in pain, expressing some kind of pain in some way or other. So this is what you need to keep in mind. And as I already said that, please read 6, 7 and 8 together. They can't be read separately. They can't be read separately. So I was talking about this Indian decision. I think that would help you in understanding that how Indian courts have approached this question. This is Krishna Kumar Malik versus State of Haryana 2011 decision. 2011 AIR 2011 Supreme Court 2877. AIR 2011 Supreme Court 2877. The Supreme Court acquitted the accused of the charges of abduction and rape of the prosecutrix on the ground that admittedly she had travelled certain distance in the Maruti van after her alleged abduction, but she did not raise any alarm to help. This shows her conduct and behavior during the whole process and renders her evidence shaky and untrustworthy, unreliable. Conduct. छटपटा रही है एक लड़की, छटपटा रही है, मारुति वैन में एक किसी ने देखा कि कोई लड़की जो है वो स्ट्रगल कर रही है बाहर निकलने के लिए, बैंक कर रही है, क्या कर रही है। और एक मारुति वैन जा रही है जिसमें एक लड़की मुस्कुराती हुई जा रही है, हंसती हुई जा रही है। लेटर ऑन द कंपेनियंस हैव बीन अक्यूज्ड ऑफ किडनैपिंग एंड ऑल। सो दिस फैक्ट दैट शी वाज बैंगिंग ऑन द डोर, द फैक्ट दैट शी वाज स्माइलिंग, लाफिंग, enjoying the company, both are relevant. Conduct, both are relevant. वो क्या बोल रही थी उस समय while she was being abducted? जल्दी जल्दी चलो पापा आ जाएंगे। Certainly this is not abduction. भागो यहां से, पापा आ जाएंगे, भैया देख लेंगे, kind of whatever. Of course. हम लोग रहेंगे कहां? Certainly they have a plan. Later on, if she alleges abduction, this statement that she made while she was accompanied by this alleged abductor would be relevant. So in that sense I was talking about, and in that sense you have to understand, I can't afford more time on section 6, 7 and 8, but still what I'll be doing is that I'll be taking up a few illustrations from section 8. And then I told you that plenty of illustrations there. Those illustrations would clarify whatever doubts you have, whatever doubts remain in your mind. As far as res gesti, its application in Indian context is concerned. So that's it.